Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be reading from John chapter 5. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for a feast of the Jews. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie: the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat." But he replied, "The man who made me well said to me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" So they asked him, "Who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk?" The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you are well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. So, because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jews persecuted him. Jesus said to them, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working." For this reason, the Jews tried all the harder to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. Now, we're going to stop there. Okay. Some strange things going on in this particular story. So Jesus is going by the pool of Bethesda, and he meets a man who's been lame for 38 years. And Jesus, first of all, he confronts this guy. He goes to this guy first, and the guy didn't seek him out. The man did not seek Jesus out. He's just sitting there, and Jesus says, "Hey, do you want to be better? Do you want to be well?" Almost a silly question, you know. It's kind of, obviously Jesus was trying to draw the man out because of course he wants to get well. He's been lame for 38 years and he's sitting by the pool of Bethesda. And the guy has a strange response for us. He says, well, he doesn't say, "Yes, I want to get well." Instead, he says, every time that, the water is stirred, someone gets there before me. What? Let me explain a little bit. So this pool of Bethesda, it was believed at that time that the pool of Bethesda, it was occasionally stirred up about once a day. It would waters would rush in or whatever. And it was believed that this pool had healing powers. In fact, there's even later manuscripts. The version of the Bible that I read to you just now did not include John chapter 5, verse 4. And the reason is because later manuscripts added in verse 4, which is really strange and doesn't seem consistent with the rest of the Bible. And in fact, it was a much later edition. And so usually the Bible will kind of have a little footnote like, "Hey, this verse is not in the earliest manuscripts, so maybe discard it." And actually this Bible that I read to you just already went ahead and discarded it and put it in a footnote saying, "Hey, if you want to know what it said, this is what it said." But what it said was that once a day, an angel would come down and stir up the waters, and the first person who got into the water after it was stirred up was healed of whatever sickness they had. Kind of an odd, like I said, it doesn't feel like it really belongs in the Bible. And it does not. It's very superstitious. It's not healing that's coming from God, and it's kind of this like first come, first serve mentality of healing. What? Now, some of this, but that is what the people believed. The people, or some of the people believed of that time when Jesus was walking through there, and that's why it had these 5 porches around it, these colonnades or porticos, depending on whatever translation you're reading, and these people would all lay around it, all the blind and the lame and the withered and, all these people, so that they could jump in as soon as the water was stirred up. Now, this could also be, this superstition could also be due to the fact that nearby was a Roman temple. I don't know if it was a temple. I don't know what you'd call it, but some sort of a place devoted to Asclepius, which was the Roman god of healing. And so it was kind of this idea of healing happening here in this pool, which is really strange because the pool actually was just to the north of the temple, like the Israelite temple to the Judeo-Christian God. So anyhow, all that to say, these people would hang out there and they would seek to be healed. So Jesus says, "Do you want to be healed?" He says, "Every time it's stirred up, I can't get in first. Somebody gets there before me," which is understandable. The man's paralyzed. I honestly am not even sure what his attempts even looked like. I mean, was he trying to roll, or I don't really know. I honestly have no idea. But we know that he wasn't able to get there, and he was very helpless. I mean, his response was very dejected. Like I said, he's not even like, "Yes, of course I want to get healed." He doesn't even engage with Jesus in that way. His response is simply, I'm always beaten. Someone always beats me to it. I always lose. That's his response, basically. He kind of has this hopelessness. And we see in this the hopelessness that comes from putting your faith in anything other than God. How many of us and how many, people do we know who are just wearing themselves out, running after other things other than God, other than Christ, seeking to fill some void in their life that only Christ can fill? But they're seeking to fill it with other things, and they're just wearing themselves out. Even if the things they're trying to fill themselves up with are good things, like family, or, being successful at your job, or whatever. I mean, these aren't necessarily bad things. It's not always sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Sometimes it's really good stuff. But if you are trying to fill the Christ void in your life with these things, then that by nature makes them idols. And if they are idols, they have now become bad things. And your use of them is sick, and it only leads to hopelessness and dejection. It leads to an emptiness. It leads to no matter what I do, I always lose. Somebody always beats me. That's this guy's response. And so Jesus comes to him, and and what's amazing, like I said, this guy wasn't even seeking Jesus out. In all the other healings that I can think of, they're usually, "Hey, Jesus, hey, stop a minute, I help me," or there's some, like even with the woman who didn't call him out, the woman who had the bleeding, she reached out and touched him, bloom, maybe if I just touch him. These people are seeking Jesus out, but in this one case, Jesus straight up goes to this guy. So it makes you wonder, like, why? What was the deal there? And there's a little bit of a deeper situation going on there that I want us to look into. Now, of course, the man, what's fascinating is that Jesus tells him, if you want to be well, get up, take your mat, and walk. You almost think, like, if I was in that situation, if I'm like, I'm paralyzed, and then Jesus was like, well, just get up and walk. So it almost feels a little insulting, like, no, didn't you hear me? Like, that's the problem. I cannot get up and walk. I'm paralyzed. But the man does. And I was reading a commentary that said that this shows that no matter how weak or faltering or small it may have been, this man did have to exercise at least a small amount of faith to do that. And the point of this commentary was saying that when God calls us to do something, we are not always, and in fact often are not at all, equipped to do what he has called us to do. And yet if we step out in faith, we find our obedience leads to our equipping. It was kind of painting a picture of this guy, Jesus says, get up, take your mat and walk. And the guy, makes some little effort. And in making that effort, he begins to be healed. It's not as if he was healed and then he got up. It's as he's getting up, he's being healed. And he's finding more and more strength, which I thought was fascinating, because that is true. That is how it works. We're not always equipped for what God calls us to do. So if you're being called to do something and you're like, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not Christian enough, I screwed up, and did whatever the other day, and I don't know, I'm just really, whatever. Have faith in the God who has strength and power to overcome your sins and your shortcomings and your failings as a human being. Have that faith and step out in obedience, and you will find that he will begin to equip you exactly as you need in the midst of your obedience. So there's that. And then, of course, you have the discussion about the Sabbath. It was a Sabbath day, and technically no one should have been working. So the Pharisees are like, hey, what are you doing? You don't you know it's against the law for you to carry your mat? And this guy's answer, he's like, well, the guy who healed me told me to take up your mat and walk. And I mean, his answer is very telling. It's like he's basically saying, listen, this man healed me. He has the power and the right to tell me whatever he wants me to do. And should we not also look at Christ in that way? The Jesus who saves me from my sin has every right to be the Jesus who is Lord over my every action, right? I mean, I should be willing to, in the face of everything, whatever I may have to cast aside, tradition or culture or politics or whatever, I should be able to say, listen, whatever Jesus is calling me to, I'm going to do it, because he's not just my Savior, he is my Lord. Anyhow, I'm so sorry. I hope this doesn't go long. I fear that it probably will. But there's another event that happens. It's very similar, because this has happened at the Pool of Bethesda. It was a pool that was a mikveh for the people cleaning themselves before they go in to worship at the temple. It seemed to have some sort of healing powers, and the people were there. Jesus sought out this blind man this lame man on a Sabbath day and healed him so that he could walk. And then a very similar event happens in a different place, at the Pool of Siloam, which is actually another mikveh, another pool for cleansing that's just south of the temple. That was north of the temple. This is south of the temple. And let's see here. This is in John chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. Okay? It's not like this man was born with seeing eyes and then they got injured or something. He's blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word, Siloam, means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "Nah, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner do such miraculous signs?" So they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." The Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now, that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody's ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." Okay, that was long, but I want you to see some of the similarities there. So he comes to the pool of Siloam. Again, this man, there's no record of this man accosting Jesus or asking to be healed of his blindness. Jesus is just passing by, and his disciples make some comment, "Hey, who sinned? Was it him or his parents?" And Jesus says, neither of them sinned, but it happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. I don't think that Jesus is saying that this man has never sinned or that his parents have never sinned. I think Jesus is saying that this blindness is not just a result of any one particular sin. I mean, we live in a fallen world, and sometimes bad things just happen, and people are just born not necessarily whole, as this blind man was. And so I think Jesus is just saying, this is just kind of the way it is, guys, but now you're going to see God's work, his mighty power displayed in him, which is what happened. So we see this man like the other one. The other man was hopeless because he'd been chasing after his these false idols or whatever, these false beliefs. And this guy, you see a hopelessness there too. I mean, he's hopelessly lost and blind as he is enthralled to sin or to whatever, it is. Basically, it's painting a picture of all of us. We are this man in Siloam, where there's nothing we can do about it. Is it because my parents sinned or because I sinned? That's just, I have a sinful nature. I'm a human being, and I am blind from birth. I never knew any different. And what's amazing about this man being blind from birth is that I've heard it said that people who are blind from birth, aka their eyes have never functioned, that means that their brains have never actually achieved the ability to even process visual images. And so healing his blindness was not simply a matter of correcting his eyes, as you see here, I'm wearing glasses, as an optometrist can do. Now they can just simply bend the light and make your eyes better. This was not an issue of that. It actually had to happen on a neurological level, even, to help his brain even understand what he was seeing, because he had never seen anything. And so anyhow, all that to say, this you can see the hopelessness that this man has, where even if somebody could bend the light and correct his eyes so that light came in, his brain, without short of divine power, his brain wouldn't even be able to understand what he was looking at, and it would still be useless to him. Light entering into his eyes would still be totally useless to him. But Christ comes and, of course, overcomes that hurdle. So we see again, just like before, it was on the Sabbath. We see again, the Pharisees are upset about it, and it's just interesting. I love his response, when they say, come on, we know this guy's a sinner. And he's like, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. Here's what I do know. I used to be blind. I was blind yesterday. I can see you now. I mean, I think that's pretty profound there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So here's the thing. Oh, also, I wanted to say that we also see in both pictures a wonderful image. I've mentioned several times about how these people did not accost Jesus. Jesus came to them, and we see a beautiful picture of Christ just showing his mercy and calling these two guys out. How many times, I can tell you right now, I believe that all of us were so hopelessly lost. There's nothing that we could have done if God didn't come to us first. And we just see a picture of that here. Now, here's what's amazing. This is why I told you both of these. So you have this lame man at Bethesda. You have this blind man at Siloam. They're mikvahs, pools for washing on either side of the temple in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. They're in the city of David, which was the old city that David conquered. There's, Hezekiah's tunnel goes through at least the pool of Siloam. The pool of Bethesda had one basin that filled up with rainwater, and then it had a lower basin also. Because the mikvah was for ceremonial washing, it had to be regularly replenished, so it had to be living water, it had to be running water. So they had a little gate system that would allow the rainwater from the upper reservoir to kind of trickle in and change every day, which some scholars say that was actually what the stirring of the waters was them opening that up and allowing the water to replenish itself. But anyhow, all that to say, so you have those water systems going on. Let's read something fascinating that happened around 1,000 years before these events. Okay, we're going to go back in time. We're going to go back to King David. King David is now king, all right? And he sees this city that has never been conquered. Joshua came in, he conquered the promised land, but a long time has passed, like 400 years has passed, and David's now on the scene, and there's this city that still has never been conquered. And that city is what came to be known as Jerusalem. Interesting. And David looks at the city and he's like, no, we need to expel the Canaanites that live there because they are still pagans. They're still worshiping these false gods. We need to get them out and finish the job that God gave to Moses and Joshua so many centuries ago. And we need to devote the city to God. Now, this city at the time was called Jebus, or Jebus. I don't know how you pronounce it. The people who lived there were the Jebusites. Okay, and so David is coming in to the Jebusites. So he's about to attack them, and then they start talking to him. Now, listen to what they say. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 5, starting in verse 6. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They thought, David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, the city of David. I'm going to read a little more, but I just want to take a moment to make a side note. It says, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and lame can ward you off." Some translations say, "You will not get in here unless you are able to conquer our blind and lame." Just an interesting thought. So, continuing on in verse 8. On that day, David said, "Anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. That is why they say the blind and lame will not enter the palace." Okay. So, what we see here is King David, God's anointed king, is coming in to devote this city to the Lord. And the people who live there do not recognize him as king. You're not my king. You can't get in here. You have no part in this. Even our lame and our blind can ward you off. Or, like I said, some translations say, you'll never get in here unless you can beat our blind and lame, which is just another way of saying even our blind and lame are stronger than you. And David makes this comment about, and I don't fully understand it, but he makes this comment about, if you want to beat, if we want to take the Jebusites, we'll have to go through the water shaft to beat these blind and lame. And David's response is that he conquers them, and then he actually puts a curse on them, and then no blind or lame can enter the palace. But we see, again, 1,000 years later, Jesus, God's anointed king, God's true king, the shoot out of the stump of Jesse, the descendant of David, the true Messiah coming from the Davidic line, the one that David and every other king pointed towards. We see Jesus coming in, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem at that time, the people in power, were again being Jebusites. They did not recognize their true king. And Jesus comes in and specifically makes a point to heal a lame man and a blind man on either side of the Temple Mount. To me, I see a wonderful picture here of Jesus saying, look, the Jebusites originally said, you can't get in here unless you conquer our blind and our lame. You can't, and you can't even beat them. And Jesus it's almost as if he's saying, I don't have to conquer them. I can just heal them. I'll make them better. David conquered them and brought a curse upon them, and Jesus comes in and he heals them. And he shows to everyone, it doesn't matter what you Jebusites think. I am the king. And we see that he is the king, sent to heal the blind and broken and lame Israel. Even the nation itself had become blind and lame. When you can look at it, the world is blind and lame. Let us not be like the Jebusites who say, even we can fight you off. No. Let us instead allow him to heal us. And my challenge to you, again, is to repeat those words of the blind man. As you face difficult questions, regarding Jesus' divinity. You know, there's all kinds of hard questions in this world. Oh, you know, why do bad things happen to good people? Or why, you know, if God is all loving and all powerful, then how come bad stuff still goes on in this world? And you know, what about predestination and free will? Did I choose God or did he choose me? These are all very difficult questions, very deep. And I'm not at all saying that you shouldn't try to find the answers to those, because I think that you will really be benefited and blessed if you dive deeper into discovering the answers to those questions in the scripture, in the Bible, because I believe that the answers are there. But I have to say that there is a bit of encouragement here for any who feel like maybe they don't know, or they're overwhelmed, or there's any kind of truth that's too great for them, or questions that are too difficult. What's amazing is that if you have been touched by Christ, then you do in fact have a testimony about him. And even like this uneducated beggar blind man, you can always respond with, whatever your hard questions are. I don't know. You know, the Pharisees were saying, hey, this man's a sinner, come on. And he's like, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. Here's what I do know. I was blind yesterday, but now I see. That can be your response, no matter what. You don't have to get hopeless and say, oh, I can't figure everything out. I don't know all the answers. And like I said, I'm not saying don't look for the answers. Definitely look for them. But in the meantime, don't fall to hopelessness. In the meantime, hold firmly to the faith that says, I don't know the answers yet, and I may never, but I know this. Because of Christ, I have passed from death to life. That is the power of your testimony, and that is why in the Bible it says that they overcame the evil one by the blood of the Lamb and by the power of their testimony.